Did you go to class yesterday?
Yes, I did. And I studied and studied and...
So did I. I went home and I took the material and I reviewed it. I read through my notes and I got to class and she called on me and I didn't know what to say.
I know that's happened to me many a time. And when you get through, you say to yourself, well, I knew what I knew the answer.
I know. It was like I was tongue-tied or something. I didn't know what to say to her.
Tongue-tied. I wonder if she knows she was quoting literature. How often have you used phrases like tongue-tied? It's Greek to me. Vanished into thin air, without rhyme or reason. All these phrases and many more that we use and hear every day started with a single poet, William Shakespeare, over 400 years ago. It's highly unlikely that you can go through even one day without hearing or speaking some lines that originated with Shakespeare or some other famous writer of literature. Surprised? Well, when you think about it, you realize that our language and our culture are formed by works of literature. In a broad sense, literature can give us a better understanding of ourselves as human beings. It also presents us with different perspectives and different points of view. Studying literature and writing about it can also help you become a better writer. If you're asked to write about a literary piece, for example, you must first develop a thesis, just as you do with any essay, and explain or defend your position with evidence. Writing about literature means explaining and interpreting, not simply summarizing. Your role in writing about literature is a lot like playing detective.
John Henry Norton, you have been tried and have been found guilty of murder in the first degree. John Henry Norton, you shall be returned to the place from whence you were taken, and from there, at the time and place to be arranged, you shall be hanged by the neck until you are dead. And may God have mercy upon your soul.
John!
Oh, never mind, my dear. Just remember to bring me my Christmas pudding.
John!
It's a long way between a sentence and the end of a rope, Mr. Holmes. I'll kill you before I die!
Although both Holmes and his trusty friend, Dr. Watson, see the same things on the surface, Watson isn't able to look beyond the surface level and interpret what he sees.
Oh, thank you, Watson. What is it?
Soon? Well, what does that mean?
John Henry Norton, striking terror.
From prison? He has friends outside.
It's up to Holmes to explain the facts, to tell what they mean. Your role in writing about literature is like that. You have to explain what the facts of the story add up to. You don't have to summarize what happened because you can assume your readers, like Dr. Watson, are already familiar with the case. What Dr. Watson lacks and what you can provide is the correct interpretation. Let's look at another example. You've seen rock videos. But have you ever had the experience of listening to a piece of music before you really paid attention to the words? Maybe the next time you heard that piece, you listened to the lyrics more carefully because you liked it and you wanted to know what the words were saying. As you began to listen more carefully, you began to interpret. The same is true for literature. Literary works can be enjoyed just by knowing the story level, by finding out what happens. But there's a deeper meaning as well, and discovering that deeper meaning takes some detective work. As with any form of art, the first step in interpreting is to spend time with it. In literature, that means to read it carefully. Rushing through a work of literature is like jogging through an art museum. You may get a rough idea of the paintings there, but not much more than that. On the other hand, you could spend a lot of time at the art museum. You could read about each painting, find out about the artist, when it was painted, the title, and then look at the painting carefully, perhaps trying to decide if the title fits what you see or what the artist was trying to communicate. What is the mood? How did the artist combine color and shadow to create that mood? Why did the artist paint this particular picture? All of this takes time and effort, but it also makes the piece more meaningful, and it makes your trip to the museum and the time you spend there more worthwhile. Spending time with literature is like that. It requires not only careful reading, but thinking about what you're reading. You read a lot of things in the course of a day. Information signs, schedules, menus, magazines, even the ingredients in the food you eat. By reading quickly, you can obtain the information you need. But to read a work of literature in this way is not enough. Reading a work of literature can't be done quickly. You need to participate with pen in hand. If you own the book, you can underline phrases, note key speeches by important characters, or make notes to yourself. If you don't want to mark up the book, you can use notebook paper or an index card. And you may want to read with a dictionary close by, so you can look up unfamiliar words. Short works, like poems, should be read several times, and short stories should be read at least twice, sometimes more. You'll probably have time to read longer works, like novels and plays, only once, but you should make note of important passages and return to them later. Another way to participate as you read a work of literature is to paraphrase the literary events or storyline. To paraphrase, simply write a paragraph about the events as they occurred. This will help you to understand the surface in some detail before you pursue a deeper meaning. Let's say you've been assigned to read The Yearling, for example. After your first reading, you should paraphrase what happened. As you write the paraphrase, consider the familiar 5 W's: who, what, where, when, and why. Who is the main character? What actually happens? Where do the events take place? When do things happen? Is the time period important? Why do things happen that way? You are now ready for a second reading. The second reading is the real beginning of your critical study. While on the first reading, you get a general feel for a story or poem, on the second or third reading, you begin to understand how the writer has shaped various elements to form the total effect, and how the various parts relate. In seeing relationships, you move toward the goal of interpreting the work, or being able to explain to Dr. Watson something he may have failed to notice. Let's take a look at the elements of literature, how they contribute to a work, and how you can use these elements to develop a focus for writing about literature. When you are asked to write about a work of literature, it is important to choose a topic appropriate for the assigned length of your paper. If assigned a 750-word paper on Hawthorne, for example, you probably wouldn't choose to cover the use of symbolism and allegory in all of Hawthorne's writings. Instead, you should define your topic as narrowly as you can. You will produce a stronger paper if you treat a limited topic in depth than if you choose a general subject and touch on it only superficially. A characterization of Hester Prynne in Hawthorne's book, The Scarlet Letter, would be more appropriate for a paper of this length. In this case, we have selected the element character for the development of a thesis. Character is one of the most important elements in most literary works. Almost all novels, short stories, plays, and even most poems are written about characters. Who is the major character? What is their basic quality? Courage, innocence, pride, greed? Does the character change during the story? Is the character faced with conflict? If you can answer any of these questions, you probably have the basis for a character analysis. Let's suppose you've decided to write about the character Ginger Ted from Somerset Maugham's short story, The Vessel of Wrath. What can you say about this person? Well, first of all, you should know that there are different types of characters. Characters can be classified. A round character, for example, is a term for a multidimensional or complex character. It is the character you feel you know a great deal about. Most often, the protagonist or main figure is a round character. Ginger Ted falls into this category In contrast, the person you know very little about is a flat character. Minor characters, who play only a slight role in the story, are often flat, one-dimensional characters. Characters who change during the course of the story are called dynamic. They grow up, learn something about themselves or about life, or develop in some significant way. The character who remains the same throughout the story is a static character. You can think of these terms as opposites. There is one other type of character that is sometimes found in literature, the stereotype, sometimes called a stock character.
It's a scandal, something huge.
These characters are easy to recognize because they can be moved from one story to another and do not change. They represent a set of people. For example, the good old boy, or the wealthy snob. If you want to analyze a character in a work of literature, you can look for certain characteristics. What things do you look for? What does the person look like?
Miss Jones.
What are they wearing?
I was just saying how disappointed.
How nice of you not to forget our small festivities.
But how could I?
But, do you mind not smoking? It makes my brother feel sick at the best of times. Oliver, throw it away.
Somerset Maugham in The Vessel of Wrath describes the character Miss Jones this way. Miss Jones was a woman of hard-on 40. Nothing in her appearance would have prepared you for such determination as she had just shown. She had an odd, drooping gracefulness, which suggested that she might be swayed by every breeze. It was almost an affectation, and it made the strength of character which you soon discovered in her seem positively monstrous. She was flat-chested, tall, and extremely thin. She had a long, sallow face. Her lank brown hair was drawn back straight from her forehead. Another way in which characters are revealed is through their speech, in what they say and how they say it. If you want to prove that a character is a loving husband, closely examine what he says about his wife, what he says to her, and how he says it. You should also consider what other characters, his wife, for example, say about him. Notice what the constable says about the town scoundrel.
That scallywag Englishman still here? Yes. How did he ever light on this particular fly speck on the map? Escaping from something or other, I suppose. He's a bit light in the head, if you ask me.
Aren't we all here? It's the heat, is it?
You're pretty easy on him, Mr. Crichton.
This is a lonely station, Captain. I suppose I'm jealous of the reckless way he squanders the priceless treasure of life.
Compared to what he says to him.
63 gulden, June Bishop.
You can wait for the money outside in the club. Now be a reasonable man. Pay them, get it off your chest and off mine.
Leave me with only a quid to my name? Why, you little tin god, let me tell you something.
Hey there!
Okay.
You're a lost sheep, if ever I saw one. Going to pieces under that cocky hat of yours like a rotten tub. If you ever had a backbone, it's all been dissolved in booze. Well, I'm sick and tired of your drunken labors.
Another place to look for clues about characters is in what they do. The saying, actions speak louder than words, is true in literature. You have to look beyond the surface to find out what people are really like. Another way in which we all reveal something about ourselves is our created environment. For example, look at the type of car you drive. Often a car becomes a personal statement about who we are, or at least who we would like to be. What can you say about this person? Think then about the ways that characters can reveal themselves: physical appearance, speech, actions, and created environment. And if you carefully balance these attributes against each other, you should get a pretty clear picture of who that character is. To write an essay about character, you need to identify some trait that you think is important. Ideally, the trait you choose should be related in some way to the point of the story. This can be your thesis. What can you say about George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life?
I want the board to know that George gave up his trip to Europe to help straighten things out here these past few months. Good luck to you at school, George.
Good luck, George. Good night. He was well liked by all the townspeople. Why? What is it about George Bailey that makes you like him? His unselfishness? His willingness to go to bat for the common man?
You're right when you say my father was no businessman. I know that. Why he ever started this cheap penny-ante building and loan, I'll never know. But neither you nor anybody else can say anything against his character, because his whole life was, why, in the 25 years since he and Uncle Billy started this thing, he never once thought of himself. Isn't that right, Uncle Billy? He didn't save enough money to send Harry to school, let alone me. But he did help a few people get out of your slums, Mr. Potter. And what's wrong with that? Well, here, you're all businessmen here. Doesn't it make them better citizens? Doesn't it make them better customers? You said that what'd you say just a minute ago? They had to wait and save their money before they even thought of a decent home? Wait for what? Until their children grow up and leave them, until they're so old and broken down that you know how long it takes a working man to save $5,000? Just remember this, Mr. Potter, that this rabble you're talking about, they do most of the working and paying and living and dying in this community. Well, is it too much to have them work and pay and live and die in a couple of decent rooms and a bath?
You might say something like, the main character, George Bailey, gives us insight into the unselfish nature of a common man. After focusing your discussion around a particular trait, you can provide evidence from the story that supports your view. As you look at the narrator or main character, it is important not to confuse that person with the author. An easy way to understand the relationship between character and author is to imagine a ventriloquist and his dummy. It is really the ventriloquist throwing his voice that creates the character. The manner in which an author throws his voice in a poem or narrative is the point of view, an important element in literature. Who tells a story makes a big difference in how the story is told. Imagine a description of a typical day at college as told by a straight-A student who has just been awarded a 4-year scholarship, and then as told by a student who has just been put on probation for low grades. Point of view may be classified in different ways: first person, third person omniscient, third person limited omniscient, third person objective, and stream of consciousness. Briefly, a story told from first person point of view uses the pronoun I. The story is told firsthand by one of the characters. Most stories are told in some form of third person. That is, the narrator refers to all characters as he or she. If the narrator is omniscient, that means he is all-knowing. He is able to tell what everyone in the story is thinking, and is able to know what will happen before it actually does occur. Often, this type of narrator will address readers directly and even interpret events for them. Stream of consciousness is used to show the thoughts of a character as they would actually occur within the mind. In other words, fragments of thoughts, sensations, memories, and emotions are merged together to imitate the thought process. Stream of consciousness is more than just a description of what a person is thinking. It is also a record of how that person thinks. For example,
what have I done to have been given children like these? Benjamin was punishment enough, and now for her to have no more regard for me, her own mother, I've suffered for her, dreamed and planned and sacrificed.
To analyze a work of literature from the perspective of point of view, you need to describe what the point of view is. In Graham Greene's short story, The Basement Room, the entire story is told from the point of view of a young boy. His limited knowledge about life determines how he interprets the events that occur. This would be quite a different story if told by a third person or if narrated by a more mature character. We've covered a lot of territory in this program, from paraphrasing to analyzing to interpreting. Let's review some of the key points. Remember to be active in your reading. First, paraphrase the events as they occurred. This will help your comprehension. As you begin to explain the work, remember to narrow your focus sufficiently so that you can treat a limited topic in some depth. Use the elements of characterization and point of view to strengthen your thesis. Select details from the story that provide evidence to support your position. And remember to interpret the work, not to simply retell the events. Literature, unlike other things we read, like newspapers, magazine articles, and textbooks, helps give shape and form to our emotions. Over 300 years ago, Pascal wrote, "The heart has its reasons, which reason cannot know." In order to write about literature, then, we must be willing to become involved in it.
Identify the point of view of the narrator in each of the following passages. Is the narrator's point of view first person, third person omniscient, third person objective, or stream of consciousness? Ever since you went to high school, he said in the dimly lit hallway, I watched you in the morning go to the subway to school, and I said always to myself, this is a fine boy that he wants so much an education. Thanks, Max said, nervously alert. He was tall and grotesquely thin, with sharply cut features, particularly a beak-like nose. He was wearing a loose, long, slushy overcoat that hung down to his ankles, looking like a rug draped over his bony shoulders, and a soggy, old brown hat, as battered as the shoes he had brought in. I am a businessman, the shoemaker abruptly said to conceal his embarrassment, so I will explain you right away why I talk to you. The point of view in this passage is third person omniscient. The writer describes the thoughts and actions of the characters as if he were all-knowing. Note the phrase, thanks, Max said, nervously alert, followed by a physical description of Max. In the next paragraph, we find a similar description of the shoemaker. The narrator knows the thoughts of both men, as well as the other characters in the story. He went out, and they were alone. Paco took a napkin one of the priests had used, and standing straight, his heels planted, lowered the napkin, and with head following the movement, swung his arms in the motion of a slow, sweeping Veronica. He turned, and advancing his right foot slightly, made the second pass, gained a little terrain on the imaginary bull, and made a third pass, slow, perfectly timed and suave, then gathered the napkin to his waist and swung his hips away from the bull in a media Veronica. The dishwasher, whose name was Enrique, watched him critically and sneeringly. The author's point of view in this story is third person objective. The action of the characters is recorded without any attempt to interpret their inner thoughts or feelings. This perspective is also known as the dramatic point of view, which suggests that the reader overhears and observes events as if they were on a stage. You may have seen my mother waltzing on ice skates in Rockefeller Center. She's 78 years old now, but very wiry, and she wears a red velvet costume with a short skirt. Her tights are flesh-colored, and she wears spectacles and a red ribbon in her white hair, and she waltzes with one of the rink attendants. I don't know why I should find the fact that she waltzes on ice skates so disconcerting, but I do. I avoid that neighborhood whenever I can during the winter months, and I never lunch in the restaurants on the rink. This is an example of first-person point of view. One of the character narrates the events. Note the use of the pronoun I. Light flashed on her closed eyelids, and a deep roaring shook her. Cornelia, is that lightning? I hear thunder. There's going to be a storm. Close all the windows. Call the children in. Mother, here we are, all of us. Is that you, Hapsy? Oh, no, I'm Lydia. We drove as fast as we could. Their faces drifted above her, drifted away. The rosary fell out of her hands, and Lydia put it back. Jimmy tried to help. Their hands fumbled together, and Granny closed 2 fingers around Jimmy's thumb. Beads wouldn't do. It must be something alive. She was so amazed her thoughts ran round and round. This passage represents stream of consciousness. The character's flow of thoughts is recreated without any attempt at explanation. Fragments of thoughts, sensations, memories, and emotions are merged together. At this moment, the bedlight, always uneasy upon the plaster wall, chose to fall from its hook. He threw down the paper in sudden anger and sprang up to set it back, when he saw his name leap at him from the scattered pages. Drake Forrester found dead in his apartment. It was a small headline on the back page. He seized the paper and took it to the window and read his own obituary. Drake Forrester, an actor, was found dead in his bed this morning by an elevator man who brought him his usual morning paper. Mr. Forrester was well known in former years in successful Broadway plays. He received offers from Hollywood, which he did not accept, preferring to remain on the legitimate stage. In recent years, the paper fell from his hand. This is third-person omniscient. The author records the events as if she were all-knowing. Because the main character, Drake Forrester, is alone in his room, the narrator relates the thoughts of only one character. More specifically, this is called the limited omniscient point of view.